Good morning, everybody. Is Jamie there at the moment? No, okay. We do have several apologies, and the apologies are Brian Hunt, Tim Hall, and Stephen Crick. And I really would like to welcome you to this very interesting meeting. I think we can see...
We won't be muting.
Beg your pardon?
Corinne, could you mute, please?
Yes. There's two of us in one space, so give me a moment. Can we duplicate this?
Yeah.
Sorry, Barbara.
Oh, no, that's fine. This is just one of the little hiccups that we are going to have. So I do ask everyone to be patient, because some of you, as Corey said before, are very familiar with the process, and others of us, there's Jamie, are having an experience in a large group for the first time. Very soon we will have Stuart Bocking, Director of Policy and Cabinet, joining us. He's only able to join us for a short period of time, and he is from the Deputy Premier's office, and he's going to give us an update on the task force. Corey, you'll tell us when he's available?
Yes, yeah, I'll keep an eye. I'm keeping an eye out on the meeting room to see when he comes in, but he hasn't come in at this point.
Okay. Jamie, I have mentioned 3 apologies that I've received: Brian Hunt, Tim Hall, and Stephen Crick. Do you have any others? I think we're not hearing Jamie.
Oops, sorry. No other apologies. Stephen Crick is now attending, I believe.
Right. Okay.
Yes, I'm online. Sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excuse me. Sorry, Barbara. Stuart Bocking has now joined the meeting.
That's great. Stuart, welcome. It's wonderful that you have joined us. We know that you've only got a short time with us, and what we will do is hand over to you straight away to see what is the latest update with the Deputy Premier's task force.
All right, lovely. Thank you, Barbara, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So what we did following on from our visit to Stockton a week or so back now, it all seems a long time ago in light of everything that's unfolded since then. The arrangement we have is that within our department, it's broken into various clusters, and before anything goes for cabinet approval, it needs to get approval from the cluster. So those ministers are Minister Stokes, Keane, Hancock, Barilaro, Marshall and Pavey. So the proposal for the Deputy Premier's Advisory Task Force went to that cluster last week, and that was approved. And we've talked about a general overview as to how the panel would work, drawing from a variety of different groups who will all have input in that, with the DP sitting over the top of that to try and draw together some of the issues that have arisen and some of the expertise that is clearly there, and to sort of navigate a way through some of the silos that, through no fault of anyone, can sometimes build up when departments are operating within the confines of their own department. So that will go to Cabinet in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, what we've started to do, Chris Yates, who works for the Department of Resources and Geoscience, he met the Deputy Premier that day at Stockton Beach when we had a look at the erosion for ourselves. There is some desktop work that's already been done in terms of identifying areas where there might be suitable sand. Now, ultimately, it may require some seismic testing and it will require some drilling, but in the initial stage, he's undertaking a desktop analysis of some of the work. Evidently, some good work has been done by the department over the years, and he hopes that by the end of this month, he'll have a very good idea as to where the best locations might be to source potentially into the future sand that would be suitable for replenishment of Stockton Beach. So that work is underway, separate to the establishment of the Deputy Premier's task force. Now, at this stage, in terms of when the first meeting of the task force will be held, well, all of that's still to be determined. But importantly, what I've wanted to do is to start to sort of push along with some things that we can get going separate to the task force, and obviously the council separately to that, with money that's been provided by Minister Hancock, is also continuing on with its coastal management plan as well. So that work is continuing. Now, also, I've been in discussion with Newcastle Ports, because I think they potentially have quite a productive role to play in this. And obviously they understand some of the community attitudes around what is creating some of these problems. Now, as we've discovered, there is work being done by them on a semi-regular basis in terms of dredging sand to ensure the channel is navigable for ships moving freight in and out of Newcastle Port. Now, at the moment, under the terms of the planning approval that they have, there is a site where that sand is dumped. What I'm now seeking to do, and obviously there is a cost involved in this, which I'm trying to work through with Newcastle Ports as well. But what I am endeavouring to do is for us to write to the relevant department, which at this stage I think it is the Environment Department, and see if in fact we could vary the condition of their approval to dredge the channel, and in doing so potentially have that sand, which is suitable for beach replenishment, to be placed in an area separate to where it is now, but an area that would actually provide some assistance for the replenishment of Stockton Beach. Now, that in itself isn't going to be enough, but certainly in the short term, it would be an excellent stopgap measure. It would potentially reduce the number of trucks that might have to come in. And importantly, it's work that's being done now. It's already being deposited somewhere else. What I'm seeking to do in concert with Newcastle Port is to see if in fact we can come to an arrangement with Environment or whichever other consent authority is needing approval to in fact have it delivered somewhere else that will assist in terms of offering replenishment to Stockton Beach. So they're probably the three key things I'm working at the moment: the establishment of the task force, the sourcing of suitable sand into the future, and working with Newcastle Port to see if there would be an arrangement for that sand which is already dredged as part of their regular operations.
Thank you, Stuart. That sounds good. Are there any questions? Or is there anyone who wishes to ask a question or make a comment?
Can I just ask a question, Barbara? So
Yes.
I didn't have time to type my name. So the variation to the dredging, would that be in terms of the volume that they're taking, or would it be just the location where they dump it?
It would be the location. Yeah, at this stage, it would be the location. Their approval to avoid having to go down the path that we might have to go down, which is under the Offshore Minerals Exploration Act. They have a separate approval because it's required, and it's part of it's provided by the Commonwealth, because it is to maintain a navigable channel into the port. So it is a different type of approval. So yeah, the approval would only cover what they need to dredge to ensure the depth they require to keep the channel open. The modification would be on the location where that sand is removed to. Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Stuart.
Ron has a question as well.
Yes.
Ron?
Sorry, my question was, Stuart, the role of the task force, is it only to deal with offshore sand, or will it have a role in coordinating things like dredging inside the port if that happens, or sand arrived from other locations?
So look, at this stage, the Deputy Premier's been, sorry, there's some, the Deputy Premier's been adamant that, you know, he wanted to help drive a solution. Now, obviously, Minister Hancock and her department have done some good work in this area. A number of other departments have done some good work. I think the problem has been coordinating all of that together under the one umbrella in concert with groups like your own, Newcastle Council and others. So I think what we'll say is that the Deputy Premier will be looking to facilitate whatever we can, both in terms of short-term measures to provide mitigation and to try and improve the situation. Given obviously coming into winter, we know there'll be increased storms and probably even more pressure in terms of the beach. After visiting, he's of the view that, look, ideally, if we can avoid a measure that, you know, requires the bowling club to be moved or the playing fields to be impacted upon, that is the preferred option. And whilst there isn't going to be agreement from all parties on everything, I think that is probably one of those things that most people would want left as it is. So we will seek to come up with solutions around that. But broadly speaking, he'll be looking to oversee whatever stage is required, both short term and longer term, which would include potentially the offshore exploration, in seeking a long-lasting solution for the problems at Stockton Beach.
Right, thank you. Jackie, I believe you are next. Jackie Spiteri?
Hi, yeah, Jackie Spiteri from the Port of Newcastle here. Hi, everyone.
Oh, good, Jackie. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Good. Just wanting to clarify your comment around relocation of the licensed area. So we currently dredge material from Area E, which is within the entrance of the port, and any suitable sand material that is available, we place offshore of Stockton at a designated location under a separate approval, which is a Part 5 approval. You're just talking about the federal approval there. Is that to extend the footprint of the channel entrance for dredging to achieve more sand?
No, it wouldn't. So I've been speaking to Ross Cadell over the last little bit from Newcastle Port. No, what it would be looking to do, I suppose, is better utilise the resource that you're already removing as part of that dredging. It would be a bigger shift, and that's not to say we wouldn't look at it, but I think that would also come down to the sort of equipment you had available. I think at this stage, the equipment Newcastle Port has is sufficient for what it does, for what it needs to do now. Longer term, if we were looking at a more extensive dredging process, then I think we'd have to look at a better vessel and different ways of doing that. So in the short term, what we're seeking to do is say, well, right, there is work being done now to remove some sand to keep the channel open. That amount of work would not alter. That work would continue to be done, but it may well be that we can seek a modification that where that sand is placed is more beneficial to helping to replenish Stockton Beach in the short term, which is an issue that has arisen. So that would be the modification in the short term that I would be looking at, rather than any alteration in terms of actually how much material is moved as part of the dredging operation.
So you'd still be looking to place it at the current designated area offshore of Stockton, where we do beach renourishment.
So there is a view that there might be other areas which are preferable, that might work better for shoring up Stockton. So that's what I want to have a look at, and whether in fact then we could seek a modification that would provide a better outcome both for the port and also for the replenishment of Stockton Beach. So that's what I'm just in the early throes of working through at the moment.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, because that is of concern, the placement of where it is at the moment. Nat Patterson, you're next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nat Patterson from Royal Haskoning. We are coastal engineers involved in looking at the issues at Stockton. I just wanted to provide some context around the idea of an alternative location for placing the dredged material. We were involved in the REF and the studies to come up with the current location where the licence applies for that material to be placed, which is just off the Mitchell Street revetment. And there are a number of constraints that have sort of forced that to be the area where the material is placed. And those constraints are things like the bottom clearance under the dredge, there's shipwrecks to work around, commercial fishing avenues. So yeah, there wasn't much scope there to be placing that material any closer to where it kind of needs to be in the southern corner, other than a different type of dredge that could perhaps rainbow or do something to get material in closer. The current dredge
and that's right. And there's some of the challenges we're faced with at the moment, and that's why I say it's early days in working out. Well, is there another way we can do that? Is there a way of getting that sand to a better point in terms of replenishing Stockton Beach? They're the things I want to look at now. Obviously, we've been looking closely at this for a little while, but in terms of now my engagement with key stakeholders, that's sort of ramped up since our visit to Newcastle. So it still is in the early stages, and they're all the sorts of things we'll be looking to see if we can overcome. I think one of the great challenges in all of this, from my read of it so far, is there's been a lot of reasons why certain things couldn't happen or wouldn't happen. What the Deputy Premier is keen to do is let's try and find a path around all of these impediments to see whether, in fact, as you know, depending on what the cost is, whether there is another way of doing things, and whether we can find a way. You know, we're all pretty resourceful people. If there is a way through some of these things, then let's see whether some of those challenges can be overcome. And keeping in mind, this is really the short to medium term. The longer term is still looking at, you know, the offshore exploration, but we've got to be realistic in terms of what that process could potentially involve, which is why we're sort of focused on some of these other things in the shorter term.
Thank you, Stuart. Could we, Ron, you're next.
Stuart, just to follow up on what I asked before, in terms of the short-term option, one of the ones that we've been looking at is from sand further up the beach.
Yeah.
In discussions before, we recognise that there's about 7 different involved and a range of different zoning applications. Sort of thing that the task force might assist in breaking through those barriers and getting a quicker solution up there.
I mean, that's absolutely what the task force is about. And again, to the point I made earlier, already we've had a lot of reasons put to us as to why certain things can't happen and what impediments are there, and this agency controls that or this group looks after that. What the DP is looking to do is, well, I'm sure we can find ways around all of these things, but it often works better if you get all of those groups together, and that's exactly what the task force will seek to do, rather than going backwards and forwards with letters and emails and whatever. We have regular gatherings where all of those key people can come together, and let's, at each point of this process, see if together we can navigate a way through this, because I think clearly there is a willingness. There's a lot of work that's been done by a lot of different groups. And one of the problems, as I see, you know, with a fresh set of eyes on it, is that perhaps some of that work hasn't been coordinated as well as it could have been in the past, because of a variety of different reasons. And so the Deputy Premier sitting over the top of it is the ideal opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about. And certainly the movement of sand from one area to another when the sand is already there, that may well be something that's high on the list of priorities in terms of a short-term option.
Great. Amanda.
Just a quick question. I'm not clear from what Jackie said against what Stuart said. Will the changes to the approvals for the harbour dredging result in additional sand being available for dumping of stock? Right, okay.
No. In the short term, no.
Okay,
no.
thank you. That's all.
Yeah, you know, we would simply be looking given this, what sand is removed now, Newcastle Port's operation wouldn't change in relation to that. They would keep doing what they do, but simply, is there a mechanism by which that sand could be more advantageously utilised in the short term? That's what we'll focus on.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure if there was a limit on how much could be brought to Stockton Beach, and this would enable some more. But that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Stuart, we know that you have to go very soon.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Fine. Any final comment or question from anyone? Well, seems not. Thank you very much, Stuart. And we look forward to the progress of the task force, because it's very important.
No, terrific. No, well, look, I'll stay in touch and you know, happy to dial into these meetings as they come up. We'll progress the task force, sort out membership and how it all works, and look forward to no doubt having the first one via something like this Zoom, I would imagine. So that seems to be the current trend for the time being.
It does, and the sooner the group can get together, the more comfortable people at Stockton will feel.
And that's why, you know, it's already gone to the cluster, so it's already working its way through the approvals process within government. Yep.
Thank you. Well, we'll let you move to your...
All right. Terrific. I'll continue on. Thanks, Barbara. All the best to everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye then.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Well, I think that we're losing Stuart, but let's move back to the agenda now. And looking at the notes from the previous meeting, I'd like to move the endorsement of those notes. Are there any concerns regarding the notes? Okay, well, I'll take that as approval for those. I'm now going to have a look at some of the outstanding action items, and they're underneath the list of the agenda. When it comes to the first item, the proposed for the vertical buried line of protection, the secant pile structure, I'm assuming that will come up in part of Joe Rigby and Karen Jurd's report. So we may revisit that if that doesn't get specific mention. Moving to the second point there about the purpose of the SLG and the review, I've had a look at those terms of reference. It seems to me that the things that were of concern to us at the February meeting have been addressed. Are there any comments from other members of the SELG regarding those terms of reference? So it seems people are happy with those, that we can endorse those now and make those the official ones. Great, okay, that's the case then. Looking down to, I noticed the grants update is already on the agenda. Looking at the Stockton Tourist Park and Lexi's on the beach, Nick, do you have any update for us on any of those things? Particularly if there's any extra information about the insurance.
Oh, hi, Barbara. It's Caitlin here. Nick's not actually at this meeting today, so he's provided me with an update. So the update is the City of Newcastle is continuing to work with the owner of Lexi's.
So there's nothing additional to that?
No, that's correct.
Are there any questions that we'd like to direct back to Nick that can be passed on by Caitlin? Yes, hello, Nuatari.
Yes, that would be the update that's come through. I do know that our property area is working through the insurance issues and also the plan of management issues on that site, and they have been very proactive in working with Nick Sabakalis at Lexi's there. I think the COVID-19 situation we're in has probably delayed some of that work as well, but I know the property are doing everything they can. They're also obviously looking at, still looking at a temporary solution. So as soon as we get an update, but it's particularly for the site at the beach, it's really around still trying to sort through insurance and also having an engineer sign off on that building being able to be used. So as soon as we know more, we'll update the group.
Great, thank you very much. So let's move back now then to item 3 on the agenda. And we have the Stockton Coastal Management Program, a presentation from Joe Rigby and Corinne Jerd. So over to you. Joe, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I'm just going to wait for Corinne to actually load the presentation. She has to share her screen with the group. So once she's done that, we'll start. I'm sure it will be very quickly.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're just checking. We had to unmute. We're coming back.
Okay, so I might just, the first part of that, actually, we don't have a slide on, so that's fine. I can address the CMP resourcing. As you may have already got from Barbara, she gave you a quick update on our CMP resourcing. Currently, we have a number of staff members that are 100% dedicated to the group. Our project team leader, Corinne Jerd, is driving the process and is leading the team. We also have a CMP advisor who's working with us, the graduate engineer, a project manager who's looking after all our engagements, and also Caitlin, who you've met today, who's our project manager for engagement. Basically, all of these staff members are working full-time on the CMP delivery. 2 of those roles, the CMP advisor and the engagement roles, are the 50-50 grant funded roles, so 50% DPIE, 50% council, the rest are CN funded. Obviously, we are in an extremely unusual situation with the COVID-19. City of Newcastle is completely dedicated to delivering the CMP, and we have defined that our team at this point in time is an essential service, and that we'll be continuing to deliver the services, obviously remotely. We're all getting very good at learning how to do technology, but also we have got resources across our organisation that will pull in as and when we need. So we've got people in our GIS team doing the UAV drone footage stuff, people in our finance and contracts team, and also support staff in our engagement team. Further to that, obviously, DPIE's team and our coastal team in Newcastle are supporting us through the process, and so they're actually, some of them are in the meeting today. We have regular catch-ups with them. We also have Royal Haskonian DHV engaged to do the CMP delivery and do our coastal engineering work, and we're working with Blue Coast, who are doing the sediment transport study, and who are also will be doing our CBA working with Council, DPIE, and Royal Haskonian. So that's probably my update for resourcing, just to let you all know where we are.
Thanks, Joe. So Corinne, it looks like you've got some material up there. Are you right for talking about that now?
How are you going? Can you hear me?
We can now.
Can you hear me now, Barbara?
We can, but there's a bit of an echo. So maybe it's because some people haven't muted. So in order to... I think we've lost you again.
I think it might be Corinne's.
Yeah, it's okay. I think we're back and we're rolling now. Jamie and I are doing a tic-tac here. His computer crashed, so we're doing COVID sharing. So am I right to go, Barb? Are we right?
We are, thank you.
Okay. It's really lovely to see you all, even if it is virtually. As you know, we are now in what I call an accordion project management phase, where we're now squishing what would have been that 6 months work that we've talked about basically into the course of a couple of weeks. As Joe said, we've we're very lucky that we have consultants who are basically working through their lockdown, both to complete the major work around, to work to a completion date for the sediment study, along with the actual preparation of the CMP. So as an essential service, we've been identified as a working team in the organisation during this time, and I just do a shout out to everyone who's in the team and here. It's been it's certainly a bit of a roller coaster ride. The issue this is what we're looking through the lens of. So obviously over the course of the coming few weeks, we'll be taking all the inputs that need to now be collapsed to actually feed the development of the options analysis for the CMP. And we're hoping there are a few dates there. So if you start at the top of the funnel, all of your feedback, along with some targeted and truncated sand movement and hazard line development work, will come from our consultants to actually feed the assessment process, which we all know we need to do to meet the department's requirements for the development of a certified CMP, which includes the economic, social and environmental costings. And we know we need some level of detail to be able to drive that, and we're going to do the best we can with a truncated version to feed the machine from the sediment study. We hope to get from that at least 2 options in the time we have, against a base case which will be business as usual, and look to try and grab a preferred option for the further development of the CMP. We hope by Friday to have some of that initial information, and then by the 21st to be available to actually do a quick briefing about how far through the process of the cost-benefit analysis we've reached, and then look to the process of making sure that the community, even in a COVID setting, has an open opportunity to come back and to talk to us, inclusive of all of the stakeholder groups, whilst we actually analyse the option we get through the drafting process of the CMP, ready to put it on public exhibition. We're targeting, we've got a goalpost of setting the 13th of May as the opening of the public exhibition, with the 12th of May being, at this stage, potentially an extraordinary council meeting. Obviously, they'll be keen to work with us to get this timetable delivered. And obviously, while it's on public exhibition, we'll still be working to make sure we can actually pull together a document that can actually go as a final draft through the process to the Minister. I also note that the output during this period, we will still have a re-engaged consultant who is going to finalise the sediment study, obviously to inform those actions that will be in the CMP, which actually point to longer term activity. And obviously they will all be brought together in what would be the Newcastle CMP, which is still due for completion for the rest of the coastline by December 21. I think I have the right date there. So this is, I guess, just to share the funnel with you, and to identify that we are working as closely as we can with all stakeholders, including the department, to ensure that what we are able to bring together has the highest chance of certification. That's about all from me on the process, unless there's any queries on that.
Do we have any questions before we move on? No, it seems not. So thanks, Corinne. If you would like to continue.
Thank you. That time frame is as baffling to everyone as it is to us by the sound of it. I'm going to hand over to our team member, Philippa Hill, who's just going to talk you through to start with. I thought we should just mention sand, and perhaps Stuart's really set the scene for Philippa to be able to just have a conversation with you about sand sourcing nourishment.
Thanks, Corinne. So Stuart has started by giving us a quick window into what I'm sure everyone is already aware is the complexity of sourcing sand for Stockton. So in terms of priority sand nourishment in this immediate short term, we are currently looking at both accessible and permissible sources such that we've previously accessed quarries. We are progressing our investigation into beach scraping with landholder approval regarding that. And Stuart has mentioned that there is that pre-existing arrangement with the Port of Newcastle for the dumping of their entrance material. So as we move forward from the short term and start looking at future sources and the approval pathways and requirements of those are contingent on the source location, the volumes that we do require and the surrounds of those source locations. So Ron touched on earlier that a lot of that, particularly from a terrestrial basis, is controlled by land zoning, and the slide you're looking at the moment is the land zoning in the Newcastle LGA. Now, as it currently stands, sand extraction is only permissible on land zoned RU1 and RU2. All current quarries are under the RU2 category. Now, when you're looking at the current zoning, you can see from a Newcastle perspective that in regards to defence land and the health services, the sewage treatment plant, and pretty much all others, we're very limited in the opportunities that we have. If you can go into the next slide. In terms of sand extraction looking to the north, if I can get the next slide up. So when we look into the Port Stephens area and we're looking up towards the Warramai Conservation lands, the zoning in that area is it's outside the RU2. We're looking at E1 zoning, and also sand extraction as it currently stands on national parks reserves is prohibited under both the National Parks Act and the regulations, or it's contrary to the objectives and provisions of the statutory plans of management. Now, discussions are very much ongoing in regards to the pathways that would apply to gaining the approval for potentially these future sources. So we are having those with the landholders involved and the agencies. And I'm pleased with the update that Stuart gave. It looks like the task force is going to play a key role in that, which is great news from our perspective. What I did want to highlight in regards to looking into these future sources where they are both terrestrial and potentially offshore is they will be informed by the wider Stockton Bight sediment transport study and the outputs of that investigation once it is completed in its entirety. So there's a truncated version of it informing the plan with our shortened time frame, but the works in its entirety will still be completed as planned, and that will inform the future long-term nourishment program that we want to put forward into Stockton. We will also be using the ongoing monitoring of the priority sand nourishment works that we will be undertaking, and we will ensure that actions that capture these ongoing investigations are included in the CMP so that we are not removing the opportunity to investigate and progress future sources as they are identified and come online. So we are in that shortened time frame, and if we had longer, we'd be able to put more, I suppose, certainty and validity in there, but where the actions will ensure that any opportunities that are identified in our work with the task force and the studies that are being undertaken, they can be progressed further.
Thanks, Philippa. Any questions to Philippa? No, I was expecting there might be some questions there. All right, well, let's move to the options analysis then, which I think is the next section.
It's Corrine. Yeah, I thought it would probably be timely just to say that we've had a whole range of incoming requests and comments from the community, and that continues. And we've been working quite closely with members of the community liaison group for Stockton to work through the sorts of options that have come through these variety of conversations. And, you know, one of these, I thought it would be a good thing to throw one of these up. This is one of the options that's come through to us. Obviously, what we're looking at are considered and professional responses from the group. I guess the take-home message for this is that we're seeing, obviously, that the beach and the amenity is the driver for this entire process, for this section of the Newcastle coastline, and that there are the other background and continuing concern around the protection of facilities, assets, services, and obviously private property. It's reflected in this sort of option that that was provided through the community liaison group. And what we've tried to do today is to just capture a draft of how the variety of options might sit, at least distilling where we currently are in terms of conversation. So I can make this larger and I will focus in. Can everybody read the legend? So we've tried to bring this together in one image. So could we just get confirmation, I guess it's by silence, that you can actually read the screen at the bottom? Otherwise I'll just go in there for a moment. Which
it's quite clear.
Is it quite clear? Excellent. I've got glasses on and it's still fuzzy to me. So, so I guess what this is trying to encapsulate is our understanding of options that we would like to take forward through the coming CMP development process. And firstly, the outcomes we're expecting from the overall program will be beach nourishment. We expect that we will protect key facilities and assets, and that would also include some of those legacy assets like landfill, etc., and also the protection of private property. And I don't know about the CLG, but I think that pretty much nails down what it is that we're trying to achieve. On that basis, we've identified just graphically that the first thing I should note is that the area of our area of interest beyond Meredith Street, so north of Corroborra Oval, including the Hunterwater lands, we've identified that that's going to be the subject of ongoing consultation. Actions to assure that that happens will be contained within the CMP, but in the process, in the time frame that we have, it's beyond our capacity to do any more than we're currently doing, which will be confined between the breakwater and Meredith Street. In saying that entire section of beach is obviously prioritised for nourishment proposals. We understand and are clear that the existing seawalls were to remain and provide the current protection that they do, and that it's recognised by everyone that those structures of themselves need to make sure that the northern and southern ends of them, both the surf life-saving, I'll call it, seawall, as well as the northern Mitchell Street seawall, are actually protected. So the yellow, purple and black lines indicate our expectations for general agreement that those things would need to happen. What we've also identified is that between those structures, clearly they are of themselves protection, but they also offer up other issues with respect to needing to extend them on their northern and southern flanks to ensure protection of property and assets. The two propositions that we bring with this are what we might do within the sections which are currently unprotected. So we've distilled it down from everybody's comments to run a beach nourishment option, which would be a red line, and the option that runs with that is looking at a coastal protection or last line of defence structure that we would run through the social, economic and environmental assessment process, and ensure that within the plan, the design and implementation could be selected when we see erosion triggers forcing our hand to actually do works. And the same thing would apply to the orange line, which is on a different alignment and currently reflects, as our best guess, where the hazard line would be for the foundations of building, based on an immediate hazard assessment which we completed during the last storm event. And this will obviously be finalised when we see the output of the current sediment transport study to inform these options. So I identify that this is a draft. Nothing in these, the line that's orange isn't set in stone until we can actually get the mapping completed, which, as I mentioned earlier, we hope we can have that ready for the deadline of this Friday. If any of these dates slide, then our capacity to actually finish the cost-benefit analysis and actually meet the timeline for public exhibition is going to be seriously challenged, I think is the best way I can put that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the overview. Again, the beach amenity is our priority, and then the protection of public and private property and services. Yeah.
Amanda, do you have a question?
Yeah, Corinne, I'm not quite sure that I followed what the proposal was for where those red lines were. So there's obviously no seawall going to be constructed in those locations. So what is it you're proposing will happen there?
The proposal is just in the legend that you can read there. The proposal for option 1 or an option 2 is a strategy which would be a prioritised beach nourishment strategy and a coastal protection construction of a last line of defence in similar ways that we've all seen in other locations, whether it be further up the New South Wales, Queensland coast. So they do indicate constructed outcomes, but they would only need to be put in place when we actually see erosion triggers met. So that is yet to be determined. So yeah, that's what.
So are we talking something like sandbagging, or are we talking something like sheet pile walls and
it'll be
rock walls, or what?
Yeah, no, sandbagging is an emergency response for the short term. We're talking about a secure protection measure to actually reduce the risk to both property and in some cases to people. And
but just not a rock wall, or it could be a rock wall?
It could be, again, it could be a rock structure, it could be a vertical structure. Other places have taken, you know, they've run a variety of options, and what we're trying to identify here is that a buried wall of construction form is what is proposed for either a location that would be seaward or a location that would be landward, and that will depend, the particular location of the latter will depend on the hazard assessments that are currently being undertaken to form a line of defence. These are structures which may never need to be built, but we need to be very clear about what our protection strategy is and when it would be triggered. And I think that, sorry if I just add, I think that is what I'm getting back from community comment is that there is no surety. They're worried because nothing is secure. And I think what we've proposed, especially when the triggers are understood, and that will take some community engagement and conversation from both the City of Newcastle agencies and you as community members, I think we will find that there will be a package which people will see if it comes out, depending on what option comes out of the cost-benefit analysis, that will actually give us a roadmap forward to get the beach back.
I think from Ron now. Ron had a question.
Yeah, my question is not so much on the the lines, but on the sand option, and it is. I guess this might be informed by the sand transport study, but a very important question is how much sand is intended to be placed on the beach. When I look at the map you have, there doesn't appear to be any, for example, in front of the current seawall. And I think what we might need to see is a table that indicates how much sand is required, for example, to move the current beach line out, say 20 metres, 50 metres and 100 metres, so that we have an idea of what that costing might be as well. How does that going to work?
Corinne, have you got an answer to that?
Sorry, the muting and unmuting is proving challenging. Just bear with me. Okay, I'm back on. Yeah, we fully recognise that, and as part of the development of the CMP, these identified construction processes will need to be fine-tuned. This is that needs to happen, Ron. Absolutely, and that is part of what will be done to get us to a point where the CMP will be defensible.
Nat, you have a question? Nat? Nat, you were wanting to ask a question.
Sorry, yes, I am. I'm here, just unmuting. Yeah, I was just going to jump in there and respond to Ron as well. He's absolutely correct. Typically what we would do in terms of designing nourishment is have an objective for the nourishment, which might be a certain beach width, a minimum beach width to be maintained over the cycle of the nourishment. You know, if it was going to happen every 10 years, say, the minimum beach width, taking into account the long-term recession rate that will come out of the sediment transport study, the nourishment volume will be calculated on that basis. And that might be something like a 15-metre wide beach as a minimum after 10 years of recession. And that, because the beach alignment is sort of wobbles around a bit with the structures, maybe that would be something in the order of 15 metres at the sections of beach that currently don't have seawall. And maybe it might be less than that where there are existing revetments. There are various factors that will feed into that, one being that currently terrestrial sand sources are the only feasible, approvable sources. So we need to take into account the logistical constraints of what one can do with trucks and sand on the beach. But there will be scope for, you know, obviously making the most of any other opportunities that come along in terms of offshore sand sources.
Simon, you had a question?
Yeah, just in terms of the option 1 and 2 that's mentioned, will we know what those options, what form they'll take before the CMP goes to consultation, or is that going to be something like what we said, some form of structure in the future at some stage to be determined?
So in order to run, to complete the coastal management plan, we need to have identified construction outcomes. So the answer is yes, Simon, we fully intend to flesh these out and to run them. We will need to run them through the CBA. Both of those buried options around the best cost structure that we can find based on our own construction and others, is currently the sort of work that we're pulling together now so that it can be a robust process, even although it's a 3-month process that we're pushing into 2 weeks. And the dates that I gave on that program of works indicate, as it does on the agenda, that there would be a meeting of the Community Liaison Group early in May, ahead of both the council meeting and the exhibition period. So we'll be back.
Okay, just another comment on that is that, I mean, looking at option 1, it does seem to be, you know, a seawall along the existing line of the beach, which to me I would assume is going to mean, you know, minimal sand in front of that, in the same way that we see minimal sand in front of the other 2 seawalls. And so how, given the I guess the challenge of sourcing sand that we're currently facing, how can the council put that option forward and say we're going to keep a maintainable or 15 metres of beach or whatever, and you know, be able to actually achieve that? Because I mean, I would hate to go through this process and get an option that works now only to have further issues in the future.
And the issue of the volume of sand that we're going to need to try to ensure that we deliver the outcomes we're after is absolutely a temporal thing, Simon, and we are already anticipating that the CMP will be quite set for a 5-year period where we will rise to the challenge of both delivering and monitoring what we can do with the resources that are going to be available, and hopefully opening that out over that period if in fact we're going to view positively what's going on in the task force outcomes. So we know that there are parallel processes here. The other thing I'd point out is that what you see today, and I understand that you're drawing from what is actually visible today, is basically structures without nourishment, because currently the only approvals we have besides our Port of Newcastle contribution, which is great, is the scraping, where we haven't had available local sources. So I think we're all going to move forward with that collective view that we need to identify both these options, actually start with beach nourishment, and then move into the buried structure only where an erosion trigger would be met. So that's the principle for both, or whatever would come out from the CBA assessment process. But we do need to take forward something that is able to be measured through the assessment process.
Okay. Before Ron, Nat, you would like to say something?
Yeah, if I could just respond to that, Simon. You are absolutely correct in what you're saying, in that putting a seawall structure along what is essentially the current beach alignment does include the risk of you know, there not being that supply of sand to maintain a sandy beach and the beach amenity. And there are a number of reasons why or how that might happen, whether it's sand availability or a particularly stormy season between nourishment campaigns. Yeah, a number of reasons that could happen. And that's the reason for the option 2, which is the setback seawall, in that it creates that natural buffer for coastal processes, so that there is the opportunity for the beach to have an erosion event, and you would have more of a buffer of sand there to give the beach the opportunity and time to then recover, without you ending up in the situation where you've got a structure and water directly interacting with it, and the sort of exacerbated erosion impacts that would create.
Ron.
Yeah, the question is prioritise beach nourishment as identified as the first option in the legend. How much beach nourishment is represented by that material that we see in the map, because it looks very much like the status quo and the beach line that we currently have today.
Who's going to answer that question?
I'm sorry. Sorry, could we repeat the question for the COVID collective over here?
The question was, there's in the legend, the very first item is prioritise beach nourishment. The question is, how much sand volume is identified in that prioritised beach nourishment? Because it looks very much like on the map outline that beach line is the status quo, i.e. what we've got today already.
Corinne?
Yeah, it will be limited to the sources that we can get in the time period that we've defined. So obviously, I think Natalie's already identified that those volumes are still in the making when it comes to the inputs that we need to prepare the CMP, and the charge that we're after is beach amenity, Ron. And so we may want to do 15 metres of beach. And as you identified, that might need to be a progressive process, actually working through compartments over time. I'm hoping that we will have more detail around that once we actually put these, the inputs that we need by the end of the week, and then start to refine the options into the CMP. Clearly what we want to see is a beach return that's functional and can be sustained over time, which is, again, the point that Natalie was making and that Simon's identified.
Amanda.
Just another question around those parts with the red line. Am I to infer from what you said, Corinne, that if a sufficient quantity of sand was able to be placed in front of those areas, that subsequent analysis of the sand movement and risks might come up with the fact that we don't need any structures behind that? Is that a possibility?
So it could be weather related as well, Amanda. I'm just pointing out that both of those lines are buried structures that would not even be triggered. They wouldn't even be entertained until an erosion trigger was actually met. So that's the intent. We may not need to actually construct them, dependent on the success of these the other, if you like, half of what the option represents.
And there, then it may be possible that we can maintain that without building these structures.
Well, again, it's the volume of sand, so the possibility is there, but I guess from our perspective, we need a plan that makes it absolutely clear that we have a protection strategy in place that will need to be, so there's certainty about what we will do. This CMP needs to provide certainty to meet the objectives that the community, that we've distilled from the community. So, and they need to be evidence-based and defensible. So once all the data, which we're still sitting on, is available, then I think there'll be some clarity in it. But I think from my perspective, what we need to show is that the actual plan is something that meets the objectives, and to not try and define how a protection line would exist in a plan, I believe would not be acceptable.
Nuatali, you would like to say something?
Oh, thank you, Barbara. Just in regards to the diagram in front of us, the good part to me is that we have one sort of general option that we're moving forward with and investigating how those last line of defence options actually work. I note Ron's comments that this is sort of a snapshot of how the beach at Stockton is right now. And when those numbers are run about the types of volumes of sand that's needed, it's very clear to me that from this, the priority is sand renourishment. And I think that once that work is done, and it's ongoing at the moment, and we understand the compressed timeframe is difficult for everybody involved, that and as Corinne said, the options around where any last line of defence, which is the red and the orange lines, that work still needs to be done. So the priority there is that if we can get enough sand back on the beach, like Amanda said, those works may not need to be done. But if there is a storm event in the future, which we all know is likely given recent history and past history, we actually know and have an adopted plan that we can actually do work on. And Corinne alluded to it. We've had many conversations and presentations in this group. The A line in the Gold Coast is constructed from rock, but it's completely buried under sand. And again, all of those options that need to be investigated and costed through this process of getting a CMP and having it done by the 30th of June need to ensure that we have considered the last line of defence and also the priority and immediate works that need to happen as well.
Thank you. Philippa, you wanted to say something.
Thank you, Barbara. I just wanted to make sure everyone is clear that there is still more assessment going on with these two options here. So both of the options we're going to be putting through a cost-benefit analysis to look at the environmental, social and economic benefits and costs to both of these to further inform our decision going forward. Excuse me. So there is more rigorous assessment going on with these, which will be informed by the information that we've got coming in from the scientific studies. So there's still assessment going on, and you're absolutely right. It is based on triggers as well.
There is a question from Lucas regarding Barry Crescent. And you may see that on your screen. So he said, so Stone Street around Barry Crescent, around to Griffith is getting a sheet pile wall. The structure looks like it's on the gutter line, not the current beach line. So we are prepared to lose the land that's currently in front of the gutter. That's a question.
I can respond to that if you like.
Yes, please.
So the plan around Barry Crescent is a vertical structure, probably not a sheet pile structure, because steel in the marine environment doesn't do very well. More commonly, vertical structures would be secant pile concrete structures. And I guess the notion of losing that land there, losing the land means gaining a beach. It's one or the other. You can either put the seawall along the current scarp and stand a pretty good chance of having minimal beach, or you set it back and you're then able to create a sort of embayed area and maintain that beach amenity as the coastline fluctuates. Does that answer your question?
Lucas, do you want to make a response to that, or anybody else? No?
Can I respond to that? Oh, sorry.
Yes. Oh, you go, Simmer.
Given that we've seen that the erosion seems to be progressive, I mean, even creating these little pocket beaches in the immediate term, I would imagine that it's likely without ongoing nourishment and that, or some sort of other manner of keeping the sand in place, that we're still going to lose those beaches and end up with a sheer wall just in more of a wavy kind of fashion, which I don't think people would accept very readily in the community, number one. And number two, having a sheer wall right up against the road, I would imagine would create some significant sort of wave overtopping issues as well. So I don't know, I know we've said that nourishment is the priority, but I don't know without being shown how that we can achieve that and maintain that, that I can support these options personally anyway.
Yeah, they do all rely on nourishment.
Absolutely.
And I guess there's always the chance that the nourishment material is going to obviously diminish over time between campaigns. So I guess the idea here is to establish structures that give you the best chance of beach amenity in the worst case scenario, where you've lost a significant amount of sand. And just to respond to some of the questions about nourishment as well, because there's the two different sort of source possibilities. There's the terrestrial source that we know we can do, but then there's the offshore source and variations on that theme that are a little bit uncertain. So we would be looking at two different nourishment sort of strategies. The terrestrial one would be very much constrained around what can physically and practically be done, and obviously the sand can only go on the dry portion of the beach. It can't nourish the full profile on the seabed, whereas an offshore solution could. So they're going to look like quite different strategies, the two strategies, but the objective of both of them would be the same. So the offshore strategy might be something that you can hit hard once every 10 years, whereas the terrestrial strategy might be something that has to be almost ongoing.
And sorry, can I just add to that? That is the point of this conversation, that we need to go forward with some understanding that we're actually writing a CMP that commits us to a beach nourishment strategy. It's absolutely essential that we all take that on board, and that these structures that we're actually talking about are buried and are there for the protection of assets only, and may or may not be triggered depending on events. And we need to, I guess, from the feedback from both private property owners and council's position is that we want to protect those assets. If Simon, your scenario arose that we had such an erosion event that we lost an entire foreshore, we would have a line of protection. But that is not the outcome that we're looking for. The outcome we're looking for is to maintain the beach and its integrity, because that's what our community wants.
We have some comments from Dave Williams and also from Amanda. Is everyone able to see those comments? Dave says, I'm not a fan of a sheer wall or the zigzag last line. And Amanda says, I'm not a fan of any option that allows us to lose more land in a storm event. It sounds like that means no beach amenity in that location for a short time. Is that a trade-off we want? And I assume for a short time is the emphasis there. And Dave Williams has responded that he agrees with Amanda. So do we have any comments on that?
Yep, I can talk to that. I guess the option one there is your option to not lose any land. That's a structure right along the edge of the beach, the red line. So I guess that was to capture some of the community's desire to not lose any land. So that's what that would look like if you want to ensure that no foreshore land is lost to erosion. That you'd have to have a structure along the current beach alignment. But the risk with that option is a pretty high chance of then there being no beach for significant portions of the time, depending on how the nourishment goes. But even, with a well-nourished beach, because the interaction between the structure and the ocean is going to be so much more frequent, it will be more difficult to maintain a beach. So I hear what people are saying about, you don't want to lose your foreshore. You also don't want to lose your beach amenity. There has to be a balance between those two things. And that's the fine line we're trying to find the best balance between those two things. So you don't lose a lot of foreshore, but at the same time you maintain your beach amenity.
Sean Shotter has asked about a definition of short time and then a clarification of does the red line show the current beach line position?
It's Corrine. The red line's meant to indicate the current alignment, and it was taken, as I said, from conversations that we've had with the members of the CLG. So I can confirm, yes, that was the indicate. That's what it's meant to indicate. And a short time post an event, if we had an event like that. Then after moving through 3 events like that, there would, and we had no line of protection, then we would be back building vertical seawalls again. So I'm trying to, take that through to its end point. If it wasn't there, if it was there, then obviously our response would need to be a sand campaign. So we need to be very flexible about what we're defining for our future nourishment program. And as I say, that is exactly what we intend to include within the CMP to enable us to be flexible and adaptive and to be very clear about monitoring so that we can, if there is time, obviously work ahead of those projected weather events as well. I see this as a very dynamic environment to manage once the CMP is actually certified, so we can get on and do some work.
We have there a comment from Dave Williams. He said, understand all that, and it's very much dependent on oceanside sand replacement. Would like, and I'd manage community would want to see sections between the Surf Club and the Pines and Barry Crescent aligned on the current beach line. And then Ron would like to make a comment. So Ron, over to you.
Yeah, I don't want to be making all the comments, but I look at this and I see the volume of beach sand that's there is very small, nothing like the amount that was suggested even as the standard issue from 10 years ago. What this plan actually represents is really another version of the pocket beach plan that we got 2 weeks ago. There doesn't appear to be any beach in front of the current seawalls, and it appears to be a plan that just maintains the status quo of the beach that's there as of April 2020, with a protective wall behind it if that beach is lost. But it doesn't appear to be any improvement whatsoever without the identification of significant quantities of sand that would build that yellow line out in front of the beach sections plus the seawall sections a considerable distance. What I heard was that we need to be worried if there's constant erosion, therefore the seawalls would be exposed. What we want to have is the Gold Coast situation where only twice for 2 very short periods of time since 1967 were those structures actually exposed. The rest of the time they're buried and there's a considerable amount of sand in front of them. What we're seeing in front of us at the moment certainly isn't that situation.
Corrine, I'm just going to point out, Ron, that this is illustrative. It was the intention to identify that the priority was, sorry, am I doing, it just sounds quite odd at my end, sorry. It was illustrative only. And as you know, I think I've repeated a number of times, we're truncating the sediment study to bring forward the volumes that will be required. And obviously the actual option, once it's matured with that information, may actually change from being illustrative to actually being based on quantification. We're not there yet. This is to illustrate the two indicative options that we will take forward and quantify in order to run the front end of the CBA.
Simon.
Sorry, in order to run the analysis process that the Coastal Management Program has to go through to meet the department's requirements, or to meet the requirements of the Act.
Corinne, it seems like you're talking about quite a few things coming in by the end of the week. If later in the meeting we decide that the whole group really doesn't meet for the next month, it's going to be very important that our group is part of the ongoing discussions, that when there's some more of this information coming in, some of the questions may be clarified a bit further.
Yes, there is an intention to provide some small group updates and to work through, and hence the next group Zoom, I assume it will be. We're hoping somewhere in the week starting the 4th of May. You just need to give us some time to actually do the work required to prepare something that will have some arms and legs rather than being illustrative.
Simon, you were next.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. I thought I wanted to clarify two things, really. And to clarify what I was getting at with the seawall, basically, is, yeah, I don't have a problem with it being a last line of defence, but as I said, I don't see this plan as that, and I just want to make really sure that as we plan into the future, that this is definitely not what we're going to end up with as a long-term solution. So yeah, I agree basically with what Ron said. The other thing was a question about sand from terrestrial sources being only placed onto dry beach. Is it possible that that sand could be pumped from, a pile onshore to the offshore zone, or to an area in front of the seawall, the current Mitchell Street seawall, where it could actually work to rebuild the beach in that location? So I don't know who could answer that, but it's just a general question.
Corinne, any comment on that? Corinne, did you hear Simon's comments?
Yes, I did, and I saw Nat's microphone open. I'm not a coastal processes expert, but I'm presuming, if it's fine with others on the team, that we are going to take up whatever method we can to make the most cost-effective input of sand. We will need to have defined that in order to identify the costs around it. So yes, Simon, we've got every option that we've ever thought of to move sand effectively from one place to another, coming into the process of building a demonstrable option that produces what it is we want in the most sustainable and cost-effective way.
Lucas Gresham has made a comment about, is there not enough commitment to sand, or the ability to have enough sand? We're better off looking at artificial reefs so that we can help the waves break earlier and keep what we can. Any comment on that?
I think my only comment is that none of the options that we've had in the past are excluded from the process of developing the CMP, and that all of those options, including what Lucas is mentioning, will be put into the top end of the funnel before an option that's preferred is produced. I think I've got that pretty much correct. We can't ignore what has gone on in the past, and we'll need to address it in the development of the CMP.
Dave Williams has asked, is there a total volume of sand calculated for options 1 and 2? And I'm assuming that you're waiting for some information on that.
Yeah, that's currently being calculated. So yeah, I'll reinforce what Corinne said. The yellow on the map does not at all indicate where the sand will go to. It's purely indicative. The volumes are currently being calculated with input from the sediment transport study and looking at the logistics of terrestrial sources.
So there's been a comment there, it should be irrelevant which of these two options we choose, since neither of them should ever be exposed, because you've been talking about buried structures.
Yeah, in an ideal world they would be buried, but we don't have control over storms and how frequently and how severe they are. And nourishment campaigns, if we do get an offshore source, they would typically be scheduled around funding cycles, and so there might be 10 years between cycles. So it's just a fact of life that you can have a particularly intense period and lose sand. The volumes are calculated based on long-term rates and averages and our best estimate at what will happen, but nothing can be guaranteed.
Keith Craig has made a comment about the sand nourishment is a stopgap short-term measure, but the need for the large volume offshore or North Stockton sand nourishment is required in the medium to long term, reinforcing that. And Sean, of course, is concerned about
sand sourcing.
Fine sand.
So can I just, Barbara, absolutely, what will come from this is that sand nourishment is going to be a way of life. These need to be ongoing. They need to be, in that sense, commitment, whether it's from a stakeholder, council, whoever, the community. It will be costly, and it will be into the future of our children. That, as far as my projections on that. So these are long-term commitments that we're making. That's why the CMP is driven by the rigour that it's driven by. But I would also make the comment that the comments that I can't see them because I'm projecting, but I can read them on the side here with Jamie. They are the basis of the part of the community engagement, which I think is absolutely essential, which is bringing an elevated level of understanding of coastal processes to the community as a whole, which some of these indicate maybe we don't have, and it will be part of what we'll be asking both our community engagement officer and our consultant specialist to help us to actually, if you like, open up the what I've considered to be the nest egg of coastal processes, which just keep giving and giving. It's essential that we're all on the same page in understanding what it means to have, say, for instance, a buried line of protection on a different alignment. It makes a big difference from a beach's capacity to recover, and we obviously need to take that information out into let's not discuss the options, let's actually discuss some of the principles behind it. And we'll definitely run that. It's been a very interesting watching those conversation points.
And we've got a comment there from Lucas again about the artificial reefs, and from Ron, the comment on the red line was that there would be less or no beach amenity. This suggests there will be very little sand nourishment in the short term. So Corinne?
I don't think we're suggesting anything like that. I think we've made it really clear that what people are looking at is illustrative, and we intend to, as soon as we get permission, because we will have a CMP that's gazetted, we'll be able to start work on delivering the strategy. At the moment, the only thing we have in regard to sand nourishment that we can implement today is the scraping of sand from 3 compartments across this map to a small tune from the intertidal zone up and onto the back of the beach. Small volumes, less than what was put down during the stage 1 sand nourishment campaign we ran just before Christmas. Yeah, so currently we're stymied.
I'd like to remind people about the time. We're well past the time. There's obviously lots that you've got to feed back to us when there's some more information, well before the end of May. Let's move to some comments about and ideas about the community and stakeholder consultation program. Karun?
Yep.
Karun, okay.
I'm just checking if Caitlin's still logged on with us. No, that's okay.
I am, yes, sorry. I was unmuting my phone, yes.
Would you like to take the lead on this, Caitlin?
Sure. So in terms of the community and stakeholder consultation program, at the moment, we are regularly meeting with the CLG, and we are also, it was also talked about having some focused group meetings with the CLG members in the lead up to the exhibition period. For the exhibition period, we will be opening up on our website for comment, allowing the community members and stakeholders to provide feedback throughout that period. As it is a condensed time frame, you can appreciate that we are working as hard as we can to get updates to the community, especially during the COVID period. But we have a media release due to go out with further information on the program, and we will be keeping people updated through our website. And yeah, so that's really the update at this point in time. Is there any questions?
Any questions? I noticed that Amanda has made a comment,
Sure.
same as I made earlier, about the importance of a subgroup or the focus group.
Yes.
CLG meeting prior to our next meeting, because I think that there's lots of things to be worked through yet.
Yeah, and that's come through loud and clear. And as Corrine said, that we are looking at how we can, like, obviously there's an ambitious program that they're working towards, so we'll just have to look at scheduling and come back to you.
Yeah, we have earmarked these catch-ups, Barb, absolutely. As I say, both for the wider CLG and to continue talking with the subgroup. That's definitely in our timeline.
Good, thank you. So we have some people leaving. Declan Clausen was one. Corinne, can we go on to an update for Stockton Beach works?
Oh, it's my favourite place to be. It's good. Yeah, absolutely. Just quickly, I know there were a couple of there's a couple of things happening. The great joy of this particular problem on Dalby Oval is that it's not a coastal process. So to some extent, it's not a Natalie problem, although the solutions may well be. What's happened here is that because of the loss of the dune, the overland flow path from the oval has actually been concentrated in behind where we now have our sandbag wall. We are coming up with some options, both direct response as well as trying to contain some of the flows that are generated from the catchment, and we'll be receiving advice on that from consultants during the week. I'm hoping, before the end of the week, sorry, and I'm hoping we might be able to, if it's dry, get some, they'll be very small works, but it might take a few days to get them into place to redirect water away from the back of the sandbag wall to try and improve its life. So yes, if you see machinery, that's why we're there. Sorry, this PowerPoint's a little slow. There are also some continuing accessway issues. Here we obviously have an offensive metal spike and a whole host of other things turning up. We're re-rationalising all this fencing, removing the safety issues with our dune services crew this week, the entry into King Street is overly steep and quite challenging for those that have got limited mobility to get up and down. So we're looking to assist in rebuilding that with some sandbagging, and we've had some opening up of the Little Beach access, obviously because people are using it, which is great. For exercise, that'll be sorted out hopefully in the next week as well. And I just wanted to remind everybody that in terms of the map we were looking at, our community-based monitoring, CoSnap, is in place and really needs to have people using it, especially given the planning processes we're going through. Obviously, looking north on Stone Street is a really valuable view now for monitoring how things will change into the future. The view from the second location at the end of the Mitchell Street seawall, obviously this will change enormously in coming years, and we really need a legacy of monitoring from the community there. And the third one at the tower at the Surf Life Saving Club at Lexi's. So the dune vegetation on the top of the structure is still holding well. You can obviously see the changes that will come over the coming years there. So can I just, shout out, if you're running your COVID walking program individually or with your family or one other, please stop by and use the cradle to snap. That would be great.
Thank you. So you're going to go on to the grants update, but just commenting on a few of these statements that have been made, that the Lord Mayor has said that Lexi's owner is sourcing a current building assessment report. When council receives this, the council can organise insurance, and then the comment that was great news. So back to you, Corinne.
Yes, there was that update on Lexi's, and one other, which I'm sorry, I didn't actually attend the quarries, but we've been doing a lot of background work in trying to source the rock material that's required for the outstanding action in the CZMP, which we are going to look for grant funding for, which is the nourishment, the rock nourishment of the Mitchell Street seawall. We've talked about this. I've shown you the work that Royal Haskoni has done to actually anticipate the rock volume that will be required to reinstate the appropriate profile, to fill the voids that have occurred, and to deal with the top of the structure at Mitchell Street. And the rock, I understand people have heard that we've been rock testing, and we certainly have. It's an enormous volume. The current estimates for that maintenance work to the Mitchell Street seawall is in the order of $4 million. Based on rock and materials and length of build. So that's underway. When we actually start will be completely dependent on actually trying to find material, rock material, that actually fits the material specification, that we haven't yet achieved that.
Any comment on that? Okay, thank you. And anything else, Corinne, before we go on to...
I'm just imploring people to, use the access ways that we haven't barricaded. And I know there are not many of them, but, it's even more important to be quite mindful about safety, especially where people are actually moving around in, either individually or just in pairs. They're shut for a reason, and it will be really good if anyone sees a barricaded access way that you believe should have been shut, just if you could keep your eyes on the prize and let us know, I'd be very grateful.
People are getting down to the beach in a variety of ways, I noticed, not all by the ways that you'd like them to.
Barbara, I've got one quick question. It's Callum.
Yes, Callum.
I just wanted to ask Corinne just where the Lexi's access way might sit in the whole timeline of things. I know it's a bit difficult, but it's something that keeps coming up from members.
Yes, I'm sure it does, and I can only apologise, Callum, but it's not anytime soon. What will actually happen there is something we will refocus our attention on, but that won't be for about 3 weeks. Yep. Before I can actually come up with what design options we might be able to put in place in the short term. I'm still
installation, maybe a couple of weeks after.
Yeah, I'm still trying to ensure that the actual foreshore of the caravan park is made safe with the constant exposure of various utilities and such. So I need to get that completely sorted before we can talk about how we might put an access ramp over the top of what is an overland flow path. It's, yeah, sorry.
People seem to be walking up on the sandbags. At least they're not eroding further by doing that. So thank you for that. So general business, keeping in mind our time, which is now quite limited. Simon, if we'll just have this, then I'll go back to Simon for his question. So Corinne, do you want to say something about the grants update?
I'm hoping it's fairly self-explanatory. We have a range of grants. As Joe mentioned, we have additional resourcing that was approved as a variation for the development of the CMP. That includes the fabulous staff that you've heard from and other fabulous staff that you haven't heard from this morning, all beavering away. And I think pretty much unless there's a question on any of them, what we're doing now is trying to make sure that all the paperwork that actually assists, obviously, the grants body to both provide us with the opportunity to lodge more applications is all in train. That's where we're focused.
Any question from anyone there? Okay. So,
Barbara, sorry, it looks like Catherine may have a question on that one.
Yes, please go ahead. Catherine,
thanks so much. I just wanted to check that you feel you're getting all the cooperation that you need, and if there's anything I should be doing to follow up on the grants issue. Thank you.
I think, yeah, right. Actually, we are we've got a mini task force happening in the background, which is trying to secure both the milestone reportings and other things. So, yeah, any assistance you might be able to offer would be fantastic. But I'm very confident that we've got it all under control. It's just a matter of trying to get the documents out the door in a timely fashion.
So, Corinne, does that mean then some liaison between you and Catherine Cusack from?
If I have any difficulty dealing directly with the wonderful folk at the grants admin section, I'll be back to you.
Because this coastal protection works at Barry Crescent Reserve, the second pile one, that was deemed ineligible, but obviously it's going to be part of the ongoing repairs essential area, or not so much repair as needed in that area. So that will be in the CMP, I understand, but it will be a request again for funding.
That's correct. Once we have it within a certified plan, then obviously we can lodge application for funding. Correct, Barbara?
And that's a really good comment to have from you, Catherine, that about being contacted at any time, and that you've been emphasising to government the need for coordination and urgency. So any feedback to her would be valued, and that's excellent. Thank you very much. Could we move now to general business?
Sorry, Barbara. Sorry to interrupt again. I think Simon had a question.
Simon, my apologies, I've missed you. Yes, go ahead, Simon.
That was all right. It was in response to the general business thing anyway, when you said it before. The Stockton part of the CZMP, we know that it's, or CMP, it's going to be fast-tracked, but given that the Newcastle, well, the rest of Newcastle section is going to be continued to be delivered at, the designated time, could the Stockton part be updated at that time? Should the situation change in any way, in terms of, offshore nourishment and all that kind of business to, I don't know, just with those other two options we saw, they obviously weren't ideal. and if they become somewhat redundant, could that be changed late in the future, like in the next year or 18 months?
Yes, Simon, we have every intention of updating the additional information we expect to get from the various studies we're undertaking, and I'm very clear that there will need to be additional Stockton actions. I've called it an addendum to the current CMP. If we can get this version certified, that will come with the wider Newcastle Coastal Management Program, which we still have to deliver, obviously, within the time frame that we have of December 21. So that will give us the space to be able to add and or amend, as I understand it from the department advice. It's exactly what we intend to do.
And the second part of the Stockton, like the northern end of the Stockton part, is that going to be completed at the same time as the rest of the Newcastle section?
Correct.
Okay.
Nuatali.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. I just wanted to summarise and make very clear that the diagram that Corinne showed around the two options that need to be put through the process of the cost-benefit analysis for the CMP are options if they are needed as a last line of defence. The CMP is actually all about sand nourishment on the beach and the important component of sand nourishment on the beach. And at the top of the meeting, Stuart Bocking coming on as the DP's Chief of Staff, that process happening concurrently with our CMP is actually a very important piece in the puzzle. So the CMP, in my mind, in my discussions with the community broadly, as well as our staff and also stakeholders, and particularly with the Deputy Premier, is all about sand renourishment as our main option and getting sand back on the beach. The options that are being explored through that diagram is about making sure we've covered off all bases and a last line of defence. They are not primary options. Our option is about sand nourishment, and then going through the processes and making sure we've covered off all the circumstances that may arise over the next decade after a CMP is adopted. And absolutely, if there is something that happens, particularly with the task force in sourcing sand between now and the rest of the CMP for Newcastle being done, it can absolutely be updated. They can be updated at any time, is my understanding. But importantly, I expect this CMP should have sand renourishment front and foremost of the document that we're actually adopting, that will take into consideration the work of the Deputy Premier's task force in this document we are going to go through the process of working on in the next couple of months.
I think that's very important, because otherwise people will take away the message of seawalls, 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 which we want the message to be sand nourishment, sand, sand, sand.
I agree, and that's why I thought I'd better come back on and say that that diagram is about looking at asset protection that's an emergency because of current erosion, which are the black lines, and the red and the orange are the last line of defence that may not need to be done, because this CMP is about sand nourishment, and it's, I can't stress how important it is that the Deputy Premier's task force has been committed to and is in the process of being convened, because getting large volumes of sand back on the beach has always been the challenge for us in Stockton. So that will be, in my mind, front and centre of any CMP, and the work that has to go on to have a fully fleshed out and adopted CMP has to look at last line of defence options. But in a perfect world, they wouldn't have to be constructed. They're not the options our CMP will go out to the community with. The options will be sand renourishment, and given these different scenarios and costings, this may or may not have to be constructed.
Thank you. And that leads on to Ron's question about when the council submits the CMP, will it have budget for large-scale sand nourishment? And then, since there seems to be no practical source for sand nourishment at present, how will that budget be designed, if the answer is yes?
Yes, and sorry, the CMP, we fully intend to have actions in it which enable. That is the take-home message. So I just reiterate the Lord Mayor's issue around the fact that this is about beach amenity. That's why the outcomes are so important. It's about the safety and security of assets, both public and private, to reinforce people's sense of safety in living in Stockton on the foreshore and visiting there. And the other issue is that the CMP offers the opportunity, just as the CZMP did, to provide an action that actually enables where we need to go. So I can see there's some comments around long-term nourishment. The CMP that we're forced to deliver by the 30th will set in train the activities that will ensure that the things we are talking about can actually be both funded, applied for, and I can't reiterate again the need for the task force and their outcomes for long term, and that we are awaiting with bated breath the outcomes of the investigation to give us the sand volume requirements. They are yet to come.
Thank you, Corinne. I'd like to now close the meeting, keeping in mind that the proposal, I'll come back to Sean in a moment, the proposal for a meeting of the larger group on the week starting 4th of May. How would Thursday, 7th of May at 10 a.m. be for a similar online meeting? Would that meet with general approval for the larger group? So no one's, okay, for Keith it's fine, and Sean is fine. So no problems with that. So we'll put that in and then go back to Sean's comment. Could you please remind me what happens if the CMP is not delivered by the 30th of June? So would somebody like to answer that? Any public executions or anything else?
I can give it a go if you like. Oh, sorry, Corinne's on there. This is Nuatali. It's my understanding in around Sydney Harbour, there's a lot of different councils, and in that area, they were struggling to coordinate to do a CMP, and the New South Wales government agencies actually took over the process. So there's a lot of different triggers, I think, available to the government if the CMP isn't delivered to meet those guidelines. I think it's very tough, obviously, on all of us trying to work on those compressed timelines. We were tracking very well in terms of the works program to get it done by the end of the year. Bringing it forward 6 months means that we're in this situation where a number of the studies and the work the consultants are doing is being run concurrently. And I can't I mean, we're all in a COVID-19 situation, and community consultation is exceptionally important component of having adopted CMP, and we're going to have to be very creative around that over the coming months. So that's a really important component. We're doing all this work and we're meeting now, and it has been deemed as an essential service in terms of council going through the process under a pandemic plan of defining what is or is an essential service that has to continue operating in this environment, and delivering the CMP and obviously our budget are two of those vital essential services. And that's why we're continuing to meet this way, and our staff are continuing to work on this process alongside the consultants as well as DPIE staff.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody for their participation today. There have been lots of people listening in, and there's been a huge amount of work that's gone on behind the scenes. There have been so many people really striving very hard to get this meeting ready for today, and the plan to the stage it is, and we look forward to the next stage. So thank you everyone for your patience. Lucas has made a question, maybe a similar setup online for viewing of CMP, that it's going to be difficult to publicly display. So I'm sure that all suggestions for public communication and consultation will be welcome, because we'd like to involve as many people as possible in being able to have a say. But it's not always going to be a say verbally online, but it may be by message. So I'm going to close the meeting now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, everyone.
Barbara.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now. Thanks for everyone's patience today. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.